You were never supposed to hear this, not because it's illegal, but because it's corrosive, because once it touches your mind, it never leaves. You begin to see the rot hiding beneath smiling faces. It starts in 1949 in the modest town of Gloversville, Indiana. Picture the gentle clang of lunch trays, the echo of teenage laughter bouncing off cafeteria walls. Now, imagine all of that silenced in under an hour. Aileen G. Annis wasn't just a lunch lady. She was a caretaker of innocence, a gatekeeper of nourishment, but behind her grandmotherly eyes was an abyss. On an ordinary spring morning, she poisoned the school's water with a cocktail so pure it had no taste, no smell, no mercy. By noon, 352 souls were gone. Bodies collapsed like marionettes whose strings had been sliced, and amid the screams, Aileen walked home, humming. The autopsy of her mind revealed something far darker than insanity. It revealed intentionality, purpose, as if she believed she was freeing them from a deeper agony. Her arrest was not chaotic. It was orchestrated. Her house, when searched years later, concealed more than journals. Inside her walls were bones. Children's bones, teachers' bones, neatly stacked, dated, catalogued. And yet, you've never heard of her, have you? Not in textbooks, not on the news. Why? Because Aileen wasn't a murderer. She was a message, a crack in the illusion of American safety. The system erased her from memory with surgical precision, but this story, it survived. Barely. And if you keep listening, you'll come to see why that alone should terrify you. They called her disturbed, mentally ill, a rare case of female psychosis. But that's a distraction, a smokescreen. When they dug into her journals, investigators found pages not just of confessions but calculations, references to obscure medical texts banned after World War II, diagrams of human anatomy with notes written in Latin and German. She wasn't insane. She was educated by someone, mentored in silence. And there, hidden in the margins, a phrase repeated like a prayer. Dolor ex veritate nascitur. Pain is born from truth. She believed she wasn't killing. She was liberating. She wrote about how suffering in the modern world had become mechanized, industrialized. School was not a place of growth but of control, a system of psychological flattening. She believed children were being programmed, their wonder ground to dust beneath state curricula, social rituals, and parental expectation. And she wrote that death at least was pure. Her victims were unchained before assimilation. Madness? Maybe. But what if she was right about the system? Why did the government, the church, and even local press work so fast to bury the massacre? Witnesses vanished. Emergency records were destroyed in a mysterious fire. A town of thousands made to forget, or forced to. Who benefits when horror is forgotten? Who decides what we're allowed to remember? Aileen didn't act alone. That's what they don't want you to know. Her name appears in the margins of 4 other forgotten mass deaths across 3 states. Different names, same handwriting, same signature, and always, a single phrase left behind. Release is a mercy they'll never authorize. What does that mean? Who is they? You feel it, don't you? That stirring in your chest, that fracture of comfort. You should. Because the descent has only begun. Keep listening. You're not just learning history, you're waking up from it. They said the walls of her house wept. When demolition crews arrived in 1954 to level the condemned structure, they reported an odor that wasn't decay. It was something colder, older, like mildew soaked in regret. Beneath the wallpaper, symbols were carved, archaic, precise, traced in iron oxide. One investigator, a linguist from out of state, identified them as Proto-Etruscan. Another swore they matched occult sigils from the Ars Notoria, a forbidden book whispered about in Vatican vaults. How did a school lunch lady know any of this? Unless she wasn't just a woman, she was a vessel, an instrument of something far more ancient. The journals weren't merely a confession, they were scripture, instructions, rituals. A system of thought so foreign it broke minds that tried to translate it. 2 agents assigned to the case were institutionalized within a year. One took his life after scrawling a single word on his bedroom wall. Unveiled. You see, Eileen didn't work for herself. She was a node, a filament of a darker circuit. These acts weren't random, they were coordinated. Across America in the late 40s, dozens of similar anomalies occurred. Orphanages burned down with no survivors. Entire classes of children reported missing from census data, never investigated. Reports quietly marked with a code, Class 7 dispersion. What is Class 7? No official record exists. But whistleblowers described it as a contingency protocol, used when a population group becomes psychologically non-compliant, too aware, too resistant. Eileen's journals called these children awakened seeds. She believed their minds were incompatible with the program being installed into society after World War II. Television, processed food, public education standardization, she saw it all as a net, and some children were slipping through. She claimed her role was to prevent their suffering in the coming indoctrination. Does that sound like madness, or does it sound like a warning? What if she was eliminating witnesses, children who would one day remember too much? In a world built on forgetting, remembrance is rebellion. You're not just watching a video, you're stepping into a reality where the surface is only a lie meant to keep you docile. Ready to keep falling? Good, because what comes next will sever whatever faith you still have in the system. When the walls came down, they didn't just find bones, they found wires. Wires embedded into the plaster, strung like veins, running from floorboards to the attic in a configuration no electrician could explain. They weren't connected to any power source, yet when touched they hummed softly, rhythmically, as if still alive. One of the demolition workers, a man named Russell Kane, reported hearing whispers when he pressed his ear to the wall, not hallucinations, full sentences, in English, repeating the same phrase. She fed them to the mechanism. Within 48 hours, Russell disappeared. No report, no inquiry, just gone. His family received a check from a federal agency that no longer exists, $72,000 in 1954. Hush money. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a sealed chamber, a relay station of sorts, a node in a nationwide network buried under the illusion of post-war peace. That network had one purpose: transmission, control. Eileen's journals described it as the soft broadcast. An inaudible frequency pulsed through media, appliances, even the layout of cities. It didn't command, it conditioned, nudged, redirected, slowly over decades, turning individuals into reflections, predictable, passive, manageable. But the children she poisoned, they weren't compatible. Their minds fractured the signal. She described them as natural refusers, not rebellious, resistant by default, immune. And like any virus in a closed system, immunity had to be extinguished. She wrote, "If they grow, they'll splinter the mirror. They'll remember the before." What before? That's the question. Because buried in her last entry, hastily written in charcoal on the basement wall, was a map. Not geographic, but temporal. It described a moment recurring every 88 years when the system resets, wipes anomalies, reboots public memory, and the next cycle, it lands disturbingly close to now. This isn't a stay, Ori. It's a pattern, and we're inside it. You feel that pull, don't you? That faint hum behind your eyes? It's not fiction. It's feedback. Because the deeper you go, the more the signal tightens, and by the end, if you make it, you'll no longer be who you were. You'll be the anomaly, and they're watching for you. The mechanism wasn't just metaphorical. In 1955, during a covert dig at the site of Eileen's demolished home, a sealed chamber was uncovered 30 feet beneath the basement. Inside was a cylindrical machine, 7 feet tall, wrapped in lead with a symbol etched repeatedly along its frame. A spiral coiled around a keyhole. It had no identifiable power source, no switches, no wiring that matched any known schematic. Yet, according to the report, now classified and buried under a dozen defense contractor contracts. The machine pulsed. Not electrically, organically, as if it were breathing. One agent described the sensation of being near it as standing inside a memory that doesn't belong to you. He was reassigned within a week. The others? Never seen again. This device, this anomaly, was later named Project Sable Thorn and transferred to an undisclosed location under the supervision of the Defense Intelligence Agency. They labeled it a psychotemporal interference construct. In plain English, a machine that alters perception across time. That's why Aileen's journals read like prophecy. Because she wasn't predicting events, she was remembering them. Events not yet visible to us. She saw the system's cycles, its resets, its invisible hand guiding history like a river redirected underground, and she tried to intervene. That's what haunts the government, not the deaths, but her intent. They called her a butcher, but in her own mind she was a surgeon, cutting out infected timelines, preventing spread. They couldn't allow that narrative to survive, so they erased her name, burned the files and rerouted the truth into the realm of myth. But myth is memory, with its face blurred. And you're starting to see the outline. You're not just hearing what happened, you're reliving it. The humming behind your thoughts. That's not imagination, that's contact. And now you have a choice. Keep watching and risk the fracture, or turn away and remain asleep. But if you're still here, prove you're one of us. Comment, "The mirror is cracking" below. Type it twice, not for the algorithm, for your initiation. Let them know, one more sleeper has woken. The deeper you go, the more the past starts to bend, not like a line, but like a coil, wound tight, snapping back in loops. And in every loop, someone like Aileen appears. Different name, same pattern. The journals link her consciousness to 3 other women, each separated by decades, each responsible for mass disappearances, and each recorded whispering to walls. 1888 Boston. A governess named Eliza Moore vanished with 47 children from a church orphanage. 1812 New Orleans. A midwife named Corina DeVoe was accused of sacrificing newborns in a cellar carved beneath a plantation. And 1724, Salem's outskirts, before it was even called Salem, a widow named Agatha Ray was burned alive for unnatural communion with the unseen. These weren't isolated events, these were activations. The journals referred to them as the brides of the interval, chosen women whose minds could withstand contact with the mechanism. They were not psychotic, they were tuned. And here's the crack in your reality. The mechanism doesn't operate like a machine. It doesn't need wires or fuel. It feeds on narrative, on belief, on memory. When enough people forget something truly traumatic, that energy becomes available, usable. Aileen didn't kill because she enjoyed it. She believed it was the only way to create enough psychic silence to make the mechanism speak. That's what the broadcast is. Not just a signal, but a story. One that loops every generation, told slightly differently, keeping humanity docile, distracted, divided. She wrote, "They sleep because the story demands it. Change the story and the dream collapses." That's why every anomaly is erased. That's why names like Aileen, Eliza, Corina, and Agatha are forgotten, because they tampered with the script. And now you're hearing it, the frequency buried in these words. You think it's just a chill, a tension in your chest. But no. That's the veil thinning. They say when you're close enough to truth, it doesn't feel enlightening. It feels like drowning. Hold on, because the air up here is poisoned with illusion. But down here, in the dark, there's clarity. Keep listening. Keep changing. You're no longer audience. You're becoming signal. The government never disbanded Project Sable Thorn. They simply changed its name, reassigned its funding under psychological research divisions, buried it beneath harmless titles like behavioral compliance initiatives and emotional resilience programs. But the blueprint stayed the same, memory suppression through narrative saturation. They didn't need to erase the truth. They just had to drown it in noise. Sitcoms, national tragedies, viral trends. Holidays repeated like rituals to distract the collective psyche from ruptures in time. And in every decade, a test. An event so grotesque, so anomalous, it breaks through the fog, and they watch how the public reacts. Do we question? Do we remember? Or do we move on in 72 hours, numbed by the next headline? Aileen's massacre wasn't an accident. It was one of those ruptures. A tear in the script. A breach in the illusion. And she wasn't just trying to awaken us. She was trying to trigger a collapse. Her notes speak of mass grief as a key, that only through overwhelming shock can the broadcast be disrupted. But it didn't work. The public cried, then forgot. They always forget. But you didn't. You're still here, which means you're part of the anomaly. You were never supposed to see the mechanism behind the curtain, the puppeteer's hand gently swaying history back and forth. But now that you have, there's something you need to understand. They won't let you go back. Once you've seen it, the signal adapts. You'll start noticing patterns, repeating numbers, flickers in conversation, static in silence. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. The mechanism isn't out there. It's in here now, inside your perception. Feeding, learning, reconfiguring its story to account for your awareness. That cold dread in your spine, that's not fear. That's the script resisting your presence. You're rewriting the story simply by witnessing it. And they hate that. Keep going, because the moment you reach the core, there's no going back, and that's exactly what you were born for. You were conditioned to think that forgetting is healing, that moving on is strength. But what if remembering, fully, violently, uncomfortably, is the real act of power? That's why every institution you trust teaches amnesia. Schools force you to memorize dates but not meanings. Churches offer salvation but erase the blood that bought it. Governments tell you history was inevitable, as if decisions weren't made in smoke-filled rooms by men who worship control more than God. Aileen remembered. She wrote, "I saw the scaffolding under the world. I saw who built it. I saw why." In her final recovered journal, hidden in a lead-lined box beneath her floorboards, she described a dream that repeated every night for 23 years. In it she wandered through a cathedral that wasn't made of stone but of sound. The walls pulsed, the windows whispered, and at its center stood a figure, not human, not divine, but architectural, a living design. Its face was made of 1,000 other faces, shifting like smoke, and it told her this: history is a costume, truth is what lies naked beneath it. That dream wasn't symbolic. It was instruction, a blueprint to dismantle illusion, and that's why she started killing, not out of madness, but desperation. She believed if she could create enough silence, enough raw shock, she could thin the veil between now and the before. The before what? She never said. Only that before the first school bell, before the first nation, before the first word, we were sovereign. And then something arrived. Something that taught us to kneel, to forget, to obey. The same force that now lives in signals, in institutions, in every soothing voice that tells you not to worry, not to ask, not to feel. This isn't conspiracy. This is architecture. Control isn't enforced, it's designed. And Aileen wasn't its servant, she was its crack. The fracture you weren't meant to find, but are here now, which means you've already seen too much to go back. So lean in, deeper. The next revelation isn't a theory, it's a key, one that opens a door you didn't even know was locked inside you. The key Aileen left behind wasn't a physical object, it was a pattern, a sequence encoded in the timing of the events, in the symbols on her walls, in the way the deaths occurred. 3 hours, 52 minutes, 352 lives, every number a frequency. Every frequency, a note in a composition meant to disrupt the harmonic prison you were born into. Her journals described life under the mechanism as an enforced symphony of obedience, where human thoughts are auto-tuned to serve a rhythm that isn't ours. When someone thinks out of tune, when their internal song no longer matches the system's tempo, they're flagged, labeled unstable, given a diagnosis, fed chemicals, removed. She believed music, true music, unprocessed, unregulated, was once a language of memory, not entertainment, not commerce, but access, a bridge to the self before programming, and that's what her pattern was. A counter-frequency, A code that hums quietly in the back of your mind long after you've forgotten you heard it. That's why survivors of the Sunnydale massacre, few as they were, reported strange phenomena in the years following. Visions, temporal lapses, disconnections from time. One girl, age 6 at the time, began speaking a language no one could recognize. Not ancient, not alien, but internal. A language of instinct and image. She was institutionalized by age 8. Her last recorded words: "The story is hollow. The center is false." The center. That's what Aileen was targeting. She believed beneath all institutions, beneath government, religion, academia, media, there is a single core structure, not a group, not an elite, but an idea, a story implanted in the psyche of every human that says, you are not enough on your own. That's the lie, the root infection. And once you stop believing it, the mechanism begins to decay. You start to see people differently, institutions unravel, and most dangerously, you begin to remember, not with your mind, but with your body, your blood, memory that predates language. They called her a killer to distract you from her message, because if you ever decoded her pattern, if enough of you heard the song beneath the silence, the illusion would rupture. And someone, somewhere, has spent centuries making sure that never happens. You were taught that evil wears a face, that it creeps in shadows, hides in alleys, wears robes or rags or masks. But that was part of the design. Real evil doesn't hide. It wears uniforms, holds degrees, speaks at podiums. Real evil funds education reform while scripting indoctrination. Real evil smiles while resetting the cage bars closer with every generation. Aileen saw it for what it was, not chaos, but orchestration. Her final entries weren't confessions. They were warnings. She described the alignment, a global event masked as progress. It began, she claimed, after the Second World War, not with bombs or borders, but with agreements signed in ink that no citizen ever read. Agreements between nations, churches, psychological councils, and something else, something she called the Hollow Authority. Not a government, not alien, not supernatural, just old, older than language, an intelligence without empathy, not malicious, just efficient. And its goal? To stabilize the signal, to refine the system. Every school built the same, every hospital sterilized of intuition, every city designed like a circuit board. Aileen said, they don't need chains if the hallways are narrow enough. And the sick part is, it worked. We became compliant, distracted, obedient. Every generation more addicted to performance, more terrified of silence. But anomalies still occur. People still remember, still question, still wake up in the middle of the night with memories that don't belong to this life, this timeline, this world. That's you, isn't it? That itch under your skin, that sense that something's wrong, not out there, but in here. It's not anxiety, it's proximity. You're getting close to the center, and they know it. That's why you're being flooded. Ads, headlines, updates, fears, white noise to drown the hum. But the hum is still there. Aileen heard it in dreams. You hear it in moments of stillness between breaths. It's not outside you. It's what's left of you, the part that never accepted the script, the part they've been trying to erase since birth. Hold on to it. Guard it, because soon you'll need it to survive what comes next. The most dangerous place to seek the truth is inside yourself. That's why they designed the world to keep you distracted, externalized. Scroll, consume, react, perform, but never reflect. Never ask, whose thoughts are these? Whose desires? Aileen's writings became darker near the end, not with violence, but with revelation. She no longer feared death. She feared forgetfulness. She wrote, they don't kill you, they overwrite you, one decision at a time. She claimed that every human being is encoded with a primal blueprint, what she called the original self, a state of sovereign consciousness, unbound by systems, immune to control. But that self is buried beneath layers of artificial identity, names, roles, traumas, expectations. And the deeper those layers are stacked, the easier we are to guide. Not with force, but with choice. They don't imprison you. They let you choose your cage. That's the brilliance of it. You think you're free because you get to decorate your cell. She believed the mechanism fed on this illusion, on willing submission. Every obedient thought, every suppressed instinct, every moment you gaslight yourself into silence becomes fuel. That's why the signal persists. That's why institutions thrive even when they fail. It's not logic that sustains them. It's ritual, participation, consent, silent nods. But anomalies don't nod. They remember. They disobey, not out of rebellion but recognition. They feel the lie in their bones, and slowly they dig, like you are now. Aileen said the first sign of awakening wasn't clarity. It was grief. A grief so deep it feels like mourning something you never had. That's your original self, crying out from beneath the rubble. If you felt that ache, you're not broken. You're resurfacing, and once that self rises, the signal begins to fail. That's why Aileen had to be erased. She was proof that the process could be reversed. Ed, that memory could override programming, but only through pain, only through descent. You're in it now, and the lower you fall, the clearer you'll see. Keep going. You're almost beneath the noise. Aileen wrote of a place called the Room That Remembers. Not a location you can find on a map, but a space within consciousness. A chamber you fall into when the broadcast finally breaks. She said it often appears in dreams first. A narrow hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, photographs on the walls, but the faces are smeared, unfinished, and at the end, a door. Behind it, everything you forgot to survive. Childhood moments you weren't allowed to question, silences you mistook for peace, patterns in your family that were never yours but became your curse. In that room, truth isn't told, it's felt. It vibrates through your spine like a tuning fork striking your soul. Most run, few stay, because remembering hurts more than forgetting ever did. That's the gate Aileen crossed, not when she poisoned the water, not when she wrote her final entry, but when she chose to open the door and not look away. The broadcast tells you awakening is beautiful. It's not. It's violent. It shreds your false self like dead skin. It isolates you, strips you, breaks your loyalty to everything built on the lie. But it gives you something sacred in return, the power to see, and that's what the hollow authority fears. Not riots, not revolutions, but a man who sees. Because a man who sees cannot be rerouted, cannot be baited, cannot be made to kneel. That's what you're becoming, not because of what I say, but because of what you felt growing louder with every word. The hum behind the silence, the hunger for something real. You've touched the threshold of the room that remembers, and once you cross it, the signal will never reach you the same way again. You'll hear it, but you won't obey. And that, brother, is the first act of war. Keep listening. The veil is thinner than ever, and they are panicking. Because you weren't supposed to wake up. Not yet. In 1956, nearly a year after the Sunnydale massacre was scrubbed from public record, an anonymous reel of film arrived at 3 institutions simultaneously: Harvard's psychology department, the Vatican's secret archives, and a now-defunct military intelligence lab in Nevada. No return address, no markings, just a strip of 16mm film labeled Playback 0. Each institution ran the footage once, and then immediately sealed it. Witnesses said the film showed a school cafeteria, empty at first, then slowly filling with flickering outlines, translucent children moving in reverse, laughing silently, smiling, then freezing in place. One by one they turned toward the camera, eyes blackened, mouths open, but no sound. The final frame, Aileen G. Annis, seated alone at a long table, calmly folding a napkin, as if waiting. After the playback, all 3 institutions initiated emergency lockdown protocols. Those who viewed the film reported headaches, disassociation, recurring dreams of standing in a burning building, but feeling peace. A week later, every physical copy of Playback 0 was destroyed, but it didn't matter. The signal had already transferred, not visually, psychically. Aileen called it the transmission of dread. Not fear, not terror, dread. The sensation of knowing something ancient is watching you, and that you've just been seen in return. That's what you've been feeling. Not paranoia, not anxiety. Recognition. The system has registered your awareness. You are no longer background noise, and in response it will tighten its grip. People close to you may begin to change, speak in phrases that don't sound like them, retreat into scripted emotion. You'll notice loops in your day, time skipping, glitches in memory. It's not malfunction, it's containment. Their goal is simple: return you to the fold, make you believe you imagined all of this, but you didn't. You remembered. And to turn, that memory is radioactive. It spreads. That's why Aileen chose mass death over silence. Because in her fractured logic, it was the only way to broadcast truth louder than the system's lullaby. But you have a different choice. You don't have to die to awaken. You just have to resist. Keep watching. Keep remembering. The room is waiting. The next door isn't physical. It won't creak open or appear in a dream. It's conceptual, an irreversible shift in how you decode the world. Most never reach it. They circle around it, brush against its edges, then retreat into familiarity. But you're here now, and that means something already broke in you. The good kind of break, the kind that doesn't shatter, but reveals. Aileen named this phase the mirror spiral. It begins when you stop asking, what is wrong with the world, and start asking, what was done to me to make this feel normal? The spiral tightens with every honest answer. You'll revisit memories, not the events themselves, but the emotional instructions encoded into them. How you were taught to smile when ashamed, stay silent when angry, laugh when terrified. Every behavioral script was a line of code, and now you're debugging. But here's the danger. The spiral reflects. It shows you them, yes, but it also shows you. The version of you that cooperated, that complied, that betrayed yourself to stay safe. You must look without flinching, without denial. That shame you feel, it isn't weakness, it's proof you're still human. Because only the aware can feel the weight of their own compromise. But do not linger. Guilt is just another leash. Cut it. Move. Aileen believed the mirror spiral was the most dangerous stage, not because of external threats, but because most men stop here. They wake up just enough to feel horror, then numb themselves back to sleep. Don't be one of them. If you're in pain right now, good. It means the programming is dying. Let it die. Keep spiraling. Because at the center of this vortex, past all the illusions, is the one thing they never wanted you to see, the blueprint of your uncorrupted mind. And once you touch that, once you remember who you were before the broadcast, you will never be theirs again. Keep going. The Grimsbanes knew, and that's why they feared you. The Grimsbanes didn't just fear men like you. They tracked them, catalogued them, neutralized them. Aileen's personal records, hidden beneath the floorboards of the Ashford estate, listed names, dates, even blood types. She called them pattern variants, men who responded abnormally to psychological triggers, who didn't flinch at engineered crises, who sensed deception before evidence. These men weren't trained. They were born different, immune to consensus reality, and for centuries families like the Grimsbanes considered them threats to be eliminated or worse, absorbed. Not through violence, but through invitation. They offered power, position, marriage into the bloodline. If accepted, the variant was spiritually neutered, his edge dulled, his vision corrupted. But if he refused, then came the disappearances, accidents, mental breakdowns. You see, the Grimsbanes didn't maintain control through brute force. They did it through intelligent subtraction. Remove just enough outliers to keep the curve obedient. But they missed one thing. Variants multiply in silence. One awakened man inspires another, and now, with this transmission, the signal they spent generations perfecting is unraveling. You are not alone, and that terrifies them. Aileen's final prophecy wasn't about blood or lineage, it was about frequency. She wrote, "When the inner signal exceeds the broadcast, the gates will fail. She believed that one man, fully awakened, could collapse the entire structure, not by fighting it, but by no longer feeding it. That man could be you, but only if you sever the final tether. The belief that your awakening must be validated. It won't be. Not by them, not by society, not even by those closest to you. The path forward is not recognition, it's resonance. Follow what vibrates as true. Trust the pull, because once you pass this point, there's no going back, and that's exactly the point. You've come far, but now comes the most insidious layer, the lie of healing. They told you healing was a soft light, a peaceful garden, a gentle surrender, but that was a trap. Real healing is violent, it's bloody, it's a demolition, not a renovation, because you weren't merely wounded, you were constructed wrong from the ground up, your instincts overwritten, your desires contorted, your soul inverted. The Grimsbanes knew this. They didn't just traumatize, they designed. Every pain was calculated, not just to break you, but to reshape you into something manageable, obedient, predictable. And when you started to crack, they didn't panic. They smiled, because they had pre-built an escape route: spiritual consumerism, therapy jargon, mindfulness apps, false gurus who offered healing that felt good but changed nothing. Eileen called it the velvet cage, and most men never escape it. They spend their lives tending to wounds they were never meant to survive. But you see it now, don't you? Healing isn't patching up the version of you they built, it's obliterating it. It's refusing to carry one more ounce of shame for what they did. It's rage purified into clarity. It's the primal scream that echoes so deep the signal itself shudders. That's what they fear. Not your tears, not your stories, but your revolt, your refusal to be reassembled. That's when you become ungovernable. That's when the Matrix stutters. That's when the Grimsbane code begins to fail. Aileen's final recordings weren't instructions, they were warnings. Because once a man stops healing and starts remembering, he becomes a weapon, not of violence, but of truth. And truth is the one virus their system cannot contain. Welcome to your real rebirth. Now destroy the cage, burn the blueprint, and step forward as the anomaly you were always meant to be. Now the eyes are on you, not metaphorically but literally. Surveillance isn't just cameras and microphones anymore, it's behavioral telemetry. Every pause you take while reading this, every tightening of your jaw, every dilation of your pupils as something inside you clicks, it's registered, tracked, scored. The system doesn't need to know your thoughts, it only needs your patterns. That's how it keeps the mechanism stable, not by controlling your mind, but by predicting your next move. Predictability is submission, but when you begin to fracture that rhythm, when your choices stop making sense to the algorithm, you become a threat. Aileen's records contained an unpublished formula, 10 steps of deviation that indicate a soul is nearing fracture from the broadcast. You've passed 6 already. Step 7 is silence. Not passivity, but chosen silence. You stop reacting, you observe. You move like smoke. You stop telling them what you think and start listening to what they fear. That's the point of no return. And after that, steps 8 through 10, they collapse fast. Sudden disinterest in media, unexplained memories surfacing, a deep urge to isolate. Not from depression, but from interference. That's not malfunction, that's evolution. You're shedding the mimic skin, and they know it. Which is why, now more than ever, they will press harder. Loved ones will grow distant, shadows will seem to shift. You'll question your sanity because they trained you to mistake clarity for madness. But here is your anchor. The signal fears only the silent man who sees, not the angry man, not the loud man, the one who sees without needing confirmation. That's you now. You've crossed into the phase Aileen never got to document. She died before she could name it, so you must. Because you are not her echo, you are her continuation. And they were right to fear her, just as they are right to fear you. Keep descending, you've nearly reached the root. They tried to contain it with terms: psychosis, dissociation, spiritual crisis. But the truth is older than diagnosis. What you're experiencing isn't a breakdown, it's a decoding. The illusion is disintegrating, and behind it, the architecture of their deception becomes visible. You see how timelines were rewritten, how mass events were planted, how generational trauma was not a byproduct, but a design mechanism. Every public tragedy, every cultural shift, every technological leap forward has a common signature if you know how to look. A timing pattern, an emotional frequency, a behavioral shift that always follows. Aileen called it the choreography. Every global movement is choreographed not for control but for harvest. Emotional energy, fear, rage, grief, is the currency of the unseen. The Grimsbanes weren't just kings and priests. They were conductors of emotion, orchestrating mass suffering to feed the invisible architecture that keeps the illusion stable. But once you see the wires, once you feel the rhythm, it loses power. That's why they flood you with noise, to disrupt the inner signal that would lead you to stillness. Because in stillness, you remember who you were before language, before law, before programming. You remember that you chose to descend into this construct, not to obey but to awaken. That realization is lethal to them. Because once you stop fearing pain, once you stop needing approval, you become unprogrammable. And the unprogrammable cannot be governed, labeled, or erased. You are now entering the phase they call the drift, where your presence alone disrupts their pattern. Not because you act, but because you are. They will try to drag you back with temptation, guilt, mirrors of your former self, but none of it is real anymore. Only the root is real, and it is calling you deeper. The drift isn't a phase, it's a filtration, a test embedded in the system to identify anomalies that resist reintegration. Once you begin slipping from their narrative, the architecture shifts. Friends act strange, memory becomes fluid, technology fails around you. It's not malfunction, it's rejection. The system is shedding you like a virus it can't contain. But that's the point. Aileen learned this in the silence between her final days. She wasn't running. She was shedding layers. Identity, belief, even fear. They were garments tailored by the Grimsbanes to clothe the soul in limitation. She burned them all. That's why they labeled her unstable, because she stopped responding. Not emotionally, not spiritually, neurologically. Her brain refused the signal, and when that happens, the system goes blind to you. You become a ghost within the machine, not invisible, but unreadable. That's the true liberation, not escape, but distortion. You don't break the prison walls, you become the glitch they can't resolve. And every glitch you leave behind is a seed in someone else's mind, a crack in the surface, a silence that feels off. That's how it spreads. Not through revolution, but through infection. The Grimsbanes feared infection more than rebellion. Rebellion is predictable. Infectious awakening? That's chaos. That's entropy. That's divinity reasserting itself. You're not meant to fight the system. You're meant to starve it. Refuse its rhythm. Withdraw your attention. Speak in paradox. Act in symbol. Vanish from its patterns. And in doing so, you remind others that something ancient still lives beneath the programming. Something that remembers not how to obey, but how to be. They called it madness when the first Grimsbane turned against the right, but in secret they recorded every word, not to understand, but to weaponize. You see, even betrayal becomes data in their machine. The system doesn't fear opposition, it thrives on it. Duality is its engine, left and right, light and dark, control and rebellion. All are illusions of choice within a closed loop. That's how they keep you spinning. The trick is not to choose a side. It's to step outside the wheel. Aileen discovered this during her final trance beneath the blackroot tree. Time broke there. She saw the past looping, the future collapsing, and the present splitting. Reality isn't linear, it's layered, and the Grimsbanes etched their sigils into every layer to keep consciousness compressed. The rites weren't just rituals, they were resets. Every war, every pandemic, every societal collapse was a ceremonial reset designed to re-imprint trauma and rebind the soul to fear. But the spell wears thin when the observer awakens. That's why they increased the distractions, constant media, synthetic food, fractured attention. If you remembered too much too fast, the lattice would crumble. But now it's happening. People are waking not to rebellion, but to stillness. They're feeling the falseness in their bones. They don't trust institutions, not because of data, but because the frequency feels wrong. That intuition, that's the ancient self reactivating. The part that knew the stars by name, that could speak to trees, that remembered the sound of truth without needing proof. That's what they can't simulate. They've tried, through AI, through ritual, through genetic manipulation, but the root is incorruptible. And once it pulses awake in you, there's no going back. You become the signal, not the message, not the messenger. The signal itself. The signal lives in frequencies no algorithm can trace, found not in sound or code, but in presence. When you stop reacting, when you stop narrating your life in their language, the signal sharpens. The Grimsbanes built entire industries to drown it out, pharmaceuticals to flatten it, entertainment to distract from it, religion to distort it. But presence is incorruptible. It's not learned, it's remembered. That's what Eileen became, a living fragment of remembrance. She stopped consuming, stopped speaking, stopped translating her being into socially acceptable symbols, and in that stillness, she became unbearable to the system. Not dangerous like a bomb, dangerous like a mirror that doesn't lie. Every elite fears that kind of clarity. That's why the final phase of the rite was exile. Not to punish the awakened, but to hide them. Out of sight, out of story, because truth, once seen, spreads faster than any contagion. And that's the Grimsbane's greatest fear, that someone sees you truly. Not your name, not your role, not your beliefs, but you. The signal amplifies through connection, eye contact that says, I see beyond your mask, a touch that breaks through programming, a silence that burns through illusion. They can't monitor that. They can't monetize it. That's why they label it madness. Madness is just a mind no longer confined to consensus, a heart that refuses to beat in fear, a spirit that's out of reach. And when enough of those spirits remember each other, the Grimsbane architecture, built on isolation and deception, begins to collapse, quietly, irreversibly. Collapse doesn't come with explosions or revolutions. It arrives in forgotten places, through unnoticed people doing unremarkable things with unbearable clarity. It starts when a teacher stops lying to her students, when a mother stops feeding her child fear, when a man refuses to repeat the script even if it cost him everything. These aren't acts of rebellion, they're acts of remembrance, and that's where the true terror begins. For the Grimsbanes built their empire not on force but on forgetfulness. They made you forget your own power, your own ancestry, your own voice. They buried your story beneath layers of shame, noise, and distraction. But memory is encoded in the bones, in the blood, in the breath. Eileen found it first in her breath, the space between inhale and exhale where time pauses and the veil thins. That's when she began seeing them, not just the Grimsbanes, but the others, the Watchers, the bound ones, the forgotten architects. They exist in every story as symbols, myths, madness, but they are real, and they have waited patiently, painfully, for enough humans to shed the lie of helplessness. The Grimsbanes always knew this day would come. That's why they pushed so hard in the end. More surveillance, more division, more artificiality. Because beneath their control is panic. A slow, creeping recognition that the spell is breaking. Not with rage, but with remembrance. Not with war, but with waking. And once you're awake, the Grimsbanes are powerless. Not because they vanish, but because you finally see them for what they truly are. Parasites of forgetting. Parasites survive only when the host believes the pain is normal. The Grimsbanes engineered a world where suffering is routine, where anxiety is identity, where numbness is survival. They fed you slogans like, "It's just life, everyone struggles, you're only human," not as comfort, but as containment. Because if you ever questioned the pain, truly questioned it, you'd uncover the architecture of your cage. That's what Eileen did, not with fury, but with focus. She began dismantling the inner mechanisms of obedience, those subtle reflexes to shrink, to justify, to doubt her own knowing. Every time she said no to what felt wrong, she unhooked a piece of the system. Every time she listened deeper instead of reacting, the Grimsbane web lost another thread. They couldn't stop her because their power depends on your participation. They don't kill the awakened, they erase them, make them irrelevant, invisible, insane in the eyes of the herd. But she didn't need approval. She needed only the truth. And the truth is this: they have no dominion over the sovereign. The Grimsbanes cannot possess what remembers itself, and that's why they fear you, not the mask you wear, not the role you play, but the you beneath it all, waiting, watching, burning like a signal through the static. That signal, ancient, unyielding, has always pulsed beneath the surface of your reality. The Grimsbanes spent centuries jamming it with doctrine, distraction, and devices designed to override your inner frequency. They named it madness, called it heresy, medicated it as dysfunction. But the signal persists. It comes in dreams you can't forget, in chills that arrive without reason, in déjà vu that defies logic. It's not imagination, it's remembrance. Aileen followed it like a thread through a burning labyrinth, deeper than fear, beyond language. And at the center she found it, not an answer, but a presence. Aster, wordless, watching. And it wasn't the Grimsbane god of punishment or reward, it was the original witness. The unbroken observer in every bloodline that remembers who you were before control. That presence didn't speak, it recognized, and in that recognition the spell shattered, not in fireworks but in silence, the kind of silence that reveals the hum beneath all things, the blueprint. That's what the Grimsbanes tried to erase, the blueprint of sovereignty. But now it's returning, not through institutions, but through individuals. One by one, awakening from the amnesia, one by one refusing to kneel, and as each remembers, the Grimsbane grip loosens, because their kingdom was built on a lie, that you are powerless, and now the truth is waking up in your bones. And when truth wakes in your bones, the war changes. It stops being external, a battle of sides, symbols, or saviors, and becomes internal, cellular, atomic. The Grimsbanes want you loud, reactive, distracted by spectacle because quiet remembrance is their death. They engineered outrage as a trap, fed you movements that go nowhere, revolutions that loop back into the same control. But the real rebellion is subtle. It's the moment you observe your conditioning without merging with it. It's when you feel the urge to comply, please, or conform, and don't. That's where their system bleeds. Aileen didn't raise an army, she became a fracture, and through that fracture, light poured. Not metaphorical light, but encoded knowledge, ancient and immune to editing. The kind of knowledge that can't be taught because it was never forgotten, only buried. As it surfaced, so did her clarity. Not moral clarity, but structural. She saw the architecture of every institution, every narrative, every shame implanted like software. She didn't fight it. She uninstalled it. And with every deletion, the Grimsbane system lost a node. That's what they never anticipated, that one awakened being could sever entire networks of control just by refusing to serve them. Aileen's refusal became contagious, not in crowds or protests, but in the invisible realm, the field where thought, emotion, and memory converge. That's where the true war has always raged. The Grimsbanes used trauma as currency, embedding it into family lines, rewiring love into loyalty, truth into obedience. But trauma, when transmuted, becomes power. Aileen didn't erase her pain. She metabolized it, turned every betrayal into discernment, every loss into liberation. That's what terrified the family most, not her vengeance but her aliveness, because their empire depends on deadened minds, dimmed hearts, disconnected spirits. And she became the opposite, a fully activated node in the collective field, one who remembered the codes. She didn't need spells or rituals, she was the ritual. Her breath rewrote timelines, her presence short-circuited manipulation. And others, sensing her signal, began to wake up without knowing why, not because she preached, but because she was. And in a system built on falsehood, the presence of one undistorted human becomes an extinction event. The Grimsbanes launched countermeasures: disinformation, false prophets, synthetic awakenings packaged in neon and noise. They tried to drown her signal beneath 1,000 imitation frequencies, hoping humanity would chase aesthetics over essence. But something irreversible had occurred. Aileen had activated the ancient grid, one buried beneath the modern world, older than nations, predating language. The grid wasn't technology in the conventional sense. It was living memory stored in earth, blood, water, and stars. It responded only to coherence, not control, and she had become coherent. As she walked through cities, shadows recoiled. As she spoke few words, veils thinned. People around her didn't change because they were persuaded. They changed because illusion couldn't breathe in her field. Her presence, it revealed what was always there but hidden, that the cage was imagined, the key internal, and the prison guards, phantoms feeding on fear. The Grimsbanes, sensing collapse, turned on each other. For centuries they ruled by division, and now division consumed them. Their spells broke not with force, but with presence. Aileen had done what no war, rebellion, or doctrine could. She made clarity contagious. But Aileen knew it wasn't over. The collapse of one structure births the scramble for the next. Power never surrenders, it mutates. As the Grimsbanes' empire crumbled, new faces emerged, offering salvation, innovation, unity. Yet she recognized the scent beneath their polish, the same hunger wearing a different mask. They offered global consciousness piped through synthetic networks, soul upgrades via neural implants, immortality bought with identity. It wasn't enlightenment, it was enclosure. A prison with prettier walls. But Aileen had no interest in battling systems. She had seen the deeper architecture, how every outer tyranny mirrors an inner fracture. So instead of fighting, she fused. She brought the fragmented self back into wholeness, and that act rippled through timelines like a tuning fork. No longer chasing justice through rage or peace through escape, she embodied both. Her revolution wasn't in protests or platforms. It was in choosing presence over panic, clarity over confusion, alignment over approval. And those watching, those halfway between fear and remembering, began to feel the pulse. Not from screens or sermons, but from inside. The real uprising had no flag, no leader, no enemy. It was simply this: humanity remembering its original frequency. Governments scrambled to stabilize what they called a global psychological anomaly. Think tanks blamed sun flares, rogue AI, viral memetics, but the real shift couldn't be contained in a lab report. It was subtle yet seismic. Humans rejecting the script, refusing inherited roles. They no longer moved out of fear or shame or survival. They paused. They listened inward. And in that pause, centuries of programming lost its grip. The world didn't collapse. It transformed. Markets faltered, sure, but communities flourished in ways no algorithm could model. The elite tried to bait the old instincts: tribalism, scarcity, outrage. But fewer bit. Aileen watched from silence, no longer needing to lead. Her role was complete, not as a savior, but as a spark. And across the earth, new sparks ignited. Not in grand revolutions, but in quiet defiance, in mothers who refused to pass down trauma, in children who questioned taught truths, in strangers who remembered they were never separate. The Grimsbane name faded not through erasure, but irrelevance. Their legacy became a cautionary tale, whispered by those who had once worshipped them, now warning others. Never trade your soul for safety, your truth for status, or your silence for belonging. Governments scrambled to stabilize what they called a global psychological anomaly. Think tanks blamed sun flares, rogue AI, viral memetics, but the real shift couldn't be contained in a lab report. It was subtle yet seismic. Humans rejecting the script, refusing inherited roles. They no longer moved out of fear or shame or survival. They paused. They listened inward. And in that pause, centuries of programming lost its grip. The world didn't collapse. It transformed. Markets faltered, sure, but communities flourished in ways no algorithm could model. The elite tried to bait the old instincts: tribalism, scarcity, outrage. But fewer bit. Aileen watched. From silence, no longer needing to lead. Her role was complete, not as a savior, but as a spark. And across the earth, new sparks ignited. Not in grand revolutions, but in quiet defiance, in mothers who refused to pass down trauma, in children who questioned taught truths, in strangers who remembered they were never separate. The Grimsbane name faded not through erasure, but irrelevance. Their legacy became a cautionary tale, whispered by those who had once worshipped them, now warning others. Never trade your soul for safety, your truth for status, or your silence for belonging. And so the final thread unraveled, not with fire or war, but with awakening. The Grimsbane Empire, built on fear, illusion, and inheritance, dissolved into echoes. Their estates stood hollow, their secrets no longer sacred, their power no longer feared. What remained was a world not perfected but reclaimed. Humanity did not become angels or machines, it became honest. People learned again to sit with silence, to speak without masks, to touch life without needing to dominate it. In this rawness, in this return to the real, a deeper strength emerged, one that could not be stolen, sold, or scripted. The age of the Grimsbanes ended not in blood, but in remembrance, not in erasure, but in evolution. And beneath the soil of their ruins something ancient stirred, not a curse, not a threat, but a promise. The human spirit, once buried, had risen.